Check. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As already introduced, my name is Bruce Makulana, and I'm a renewable energy engineer / consultant with Martin Renewables, and I have been tasked with the privilege of moderating this panel this morning. I am joined by industry heavyweights and industry experts in their own rights. And we are going to be discussing a very important topic today, which is how do we then ensure a return on investment on these renewable energy solutions, but more importantly, these hybrid solutions that we are seeing penetrating the market. And I want this discussion to sort of be a journey almost, where it's open to our industry experts and our industry captains to sort of take us through a journey of how the technology is developed, how the technology is being deployed, and obviously end up with then how do we ensure from a bankability and a return on investment perspective, how do we ensure that we maximize on those items. Without wasting any time, I'd like to maybe invite James and Julian to maybe just give us a breakdown of the hybrid solutions that we're seeing that are being deployed in the market currently. What are the use cases and across the entire market from small scale to medium scale, all the way throughout to utility scale? What are these hybrid solutions that are being deployed, and how are these technologies being fused together to give these sort of complementary uses of these technologies going forward? So James and Julian, sorry.
Hi, good morning to you all. I'm James from Blue Sun Energy. So there's been a massive shift from low-voltage storage devices within residential and small commercial to high-voltage systems. The simple terms is with demand, technology has evolved, and certainly the world has brought these products to our market. The shift from has largely been driven by the demand for battery energy storage for load shedding purposes. But very, very quickly, the move from low voltage single phase and small three-phase systems, which had multiple components, became consolidated in a single inverter battery system, which then evolved to obviously containerized solutions. The key variable in high voltage systems is obviously that there's major efficiencies, speed of storage, energy capacity. So opportunities have come for the market. Like that? Oh, there we go. Okay. So good morning again. So the opportunities have come from the market for customers and for people that require these products to obviously have enhanced capacity. And that is something which the same principles of energy analysis and engineering come to play in terms of the ability to be modular, the ability to upscale, and aligned with that obviously is also the improvement in ability to create smart systems, which is obviously monitoring and management online and remote. So there's a functional component which, in the past 5 years, which has really evolved to an incredible capacity for the technology to actually be managed and controlled, and with reporting and forecasting. And this is a very exciting opportunity as more products have come onto the market. Price has been driven down. So the opportunities for ROI improvements from a 6 to 2 to 3 year, even on a hybrid system, on a commercial, have come into play. Aligned with tariff increases in South Africa, now is the time. Unfortunately, obviously, a lot of customers still see the market as being driven by load shedding, and these products as being load shedding specific. But the tariff, the shift to particularly in time of use tariff, and the massive increase, particularly in the winter peak tariff costs, that peak tariff shavings and that type of energy arbitrage within a company, particularly in the CNI space, provides an opportunity for investors or company owners to reduce their power loads, not rely on generators, as this is particularly driven by the cost of lithium. So that's on the CNI. On the residential, the same. I mean, I think the biggest component of BI of energy storage is also driven by the inverters. The fact that they can take a punch, the fact that you've got numerous inverters that can take demand surges, and the demand surges is a major innovation which allows flexibility to take on more loads, obviously to create stability within that network, and it's really been really quite quick. I mean, in the 5 years, you needed 3 or 4 single-phase machines. Now you've got 1 or 2 machines that can take the bulk of 100 kilowatts, 200, up to 500 kilowatts in your fingertips. In your hand, you can see the power, you can manage the power, you can control SOCs, you can see the yields of the solar, and that's very exciting. Look, moving into, lastly, I'll say about on a grid scale. This is something which I'm not involved in grid, but we obviously are aware of arbitrage and ancillary services. That's something which exists in the UK. There's obviously a double-edged sword about where the cost initiatives lie relative to the fact that the technology, if you got in too early, you paid a lot for it. Now you're trying to make a yield and return on trading. But now the costs have come down. Obviously, the technology will change more towards sodium, away from lithium. But at this moment, we're an exciting prospect. The transition just needs to educate, provide the finance, and bring people into this capacity enhancing prospect of BESS as the key driver of solar in its flexibility to deliver, and in its ability to control and manage power where we need it and when we need it.
Thank you. I think you've said very important thing. There's a couple words that jump out. You talked about flexibility, excitement, and education. And right there is the crux of the batteries as we use it within ACES Africa as part of the ACES group. We've seen, so for each case study will have a different use of the battery. Within ACES, we work with hospitals, mines, factories, and universities. So every time the usage of the battery is fundamentally different. We're seeing, you're right, the usage for load shedding cover, which is extremely profitable, gives you a very nice, very quick saving return on investment under 3 years, because you save 10 Rand a kilowatt hour roughly every time that the journey doesn't start. Then you mentioned arbitrage. It's true. During the low season, we can look at 1 Rand 40 a kilowatt hour that you would save by charging off peak, discharging peak, a little bit more during the high season. There's also a usage that we're seeing more and more, which is growing in parallel to the wheeling sector. So the idea is to be able to wheel even more power by storing it behind the meter on the battery. And we're really seeing the flexibility again of being able to use more and more wheeled power, and people are getting more and more clever in the ways to finance this and improve their return on investment. So this is very exciting. We're seeing market resilience. We were chatting to plastic extrusion companies, and they were saying that every time that the production line stops, they have to flush the machines, which is extremely costly. Not only the staff is sitting, waiting for the machines to be flushed to start again the next shift, but in terms of raw materials, there's a big waste as well. And they were saying that they don't have much load shedding, but the load shedding that they have, or the grid collapse that they have from time to time, is so disruptive for them that their clients have decided to split the market shares between 3 different suppliers, and that by gaining market resilience or energy resilience, they'll be able to increase the market shares by 20%. So that's the flexibility, that's the added value of the batteries. Obviously, we're looking at a lack of infrastructure for new mines that want to expand, for example, that don't have access to enough power from Eskom. They have to go solar plus batteries as opposed to full-on Jennies. And there we're seeing a return on investment. Our latest calculations, it's 14 months, 1-4, which is ridiculously good. I mean, we've never seen return on investment like that. And obviously a mix of all of the above. Now comes the trick, because with the flexibility comes the complexity. Now you've got a very strong, if we take an analogy, you've got a very strong car with a very strong engine, but now you must have a very strong EMS. And you must have a very strong head of engineering to be able to populate the data and the inputs properly, to be able to do load shedding cover, arbitrage, time of use wheeling, based on the EMS. And that requires us, as ACES, to spend a ridiculous amount of time with our clients. And I'm not saying this in a bad way. We need to know everything there is to know about the client and how they use the power, when they use the power, what kind of philosophy do they want on option 1, option 2, option 3, and the default. And really what this brings as an EPC is whereas previously with solar only, we were an energy provider. I think now these days we've become an energy partner. Because we are walking the path, it's not a setting that is set in stone and is going to be there for the next 10 years. It will evolve with how the business will grow, with the demand, with the patterns that we're seeing in consumption. So it is really fascinating to be able to accompany our clients through their journeys in being more and more efficient. I wanted to touch a little bit on the back-to-back contracts that are required, a few tips that we've learned over the last couple years and couple months. When we started into the battery market, we were looking at different solutions for EMS, PCS, and batteries. And we've now realized that on those larger projects where there's huge and stringent performance guarantees that needs to be provided, the ability for our partners, and I see both Huawei and Sungrow are in the room, and thank you for their support in all of the projects that we're doing together. Their support is becoming paramount in the EMS and the ability to really deliver what we promised to the client. So that I would like to emphasize as well. The relationship between the OEM and the EPC is becoming more and more paramount to be able to deliver what is required. And finally, the last point that I wanted to say, again to echo on the flexibility, is that previously with PV, if you take out the Eskom power banking option, you could only really effectively offset 40% of your client's consumption without having potential substantial wastage. Now with the batteries, you can easily push it to 70, 80%. And this in itself is quite a revolution for all the people that that made the switch between PV only and the hybrid solution. So that's our 2 cents.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
gentlemen.
so much.
Yeah, so it's sounding very much to me like there is a business case in terms of deployment of these technologies. There is a business case around, call it flexibility, call it energy arbitrage, all these use cases and applications that can be rolled out throughout the entire market. So that is a very exciting opportunity in this space. I want to maybe wrap up the technology discussion with yourselves, Brian. Julian did mention the importance of the relationship around O&M and EPCs, and I would imagine OEM suppliers as well. What are your thoughts around maybe the technological innovations, both from an OEM and EPC sort of space? What are we seeing in that space, and what are your thoughts in terms of how the different stakeholders can ensure that the deployment of these technologies is focused obviously on maximizing the return on these investments?
Hi, my name is Brian. I'm from Solenzi Power, so thank you for having me. Today, I think I was supposed to focus more on the hybrid solutions, so I'll touch on that a bit, because there's a point I wanted to make when it comes to, I guess, increasing your ROI and making sure you get where you need to get. So I'm a developer by experience. I've worked in the IPP industry for over a decade. And I think the one thing that is not really emphasized quite enough, we need to have a very thorough project development process where you're planning and designing your project to sort of meet your ROI, to sort of make sure that by the time you get to your EMS, your BMS, to make sure that you increasing the efficiency of your system, you've already planned out everything from laying out your solar panels to basically what battery storage you're going to need and how much you're going to need. So it might be good to either overshoot your estimation in terms of how much battery storage you're going to need. So all of that goes into your planning process. So if you have a very thorough planning process, you're able to integrate nicely between your solar as well as between your battery storage. So that's what I wanted to emphasize with regards to the hybrid solutions around solar and battery storage, that it needs to start with design. And then you can work your way out into, I guess now, selection of technology, the best technologies to select with regards to how much exactly are you going to need for your battery and how much you're going to need for your solar panels. So in this case, from my experience, there are various sizes of solar panels that you can utilize, of course, but the one thing that is most important is how much demand is required from the client side, or how much we're going to need as an IPP to basically export to the grid. So solar panel technology, it's getting better as we go along. The capacity of it, it's increasing the viability of these projects, the ROI as well, because we're getting more effective solar panels, we're getting more storage technologies to store the power that you're generating. So it's a very exciting time with regards to the technologies that are supporting the industry and ensuring that we can actually utilize the resource to its full capacity. So that is basically what I would say with regards to technology involvement in the space and with regards to hybrid solutions as well. Yep.
No, thanks for that input, Brian. Yeah, it sounds, Brian spoke like a true engineer where he spoke about design and technology. But I wanted to then, and maybe just to speak to Nolutando and Jonathan on this, I have the technology, I've identified what I need to deploy, I've identified the demand. How do I convince buy-in on these projects? In other words, how do we ensure that from both a financing perspective and a business development perspective, these projects are are bankable? Your thoughts on this, please.
Okay, if I go. So when I think about ROI and Globelec looks at their investments, we look at ways to differentiate ourselves. So we're under no illusion that the battery storage and PV space is hyper competitive. It's not, there's no first mover advantage. Everyone's looking at batteries. In terms of technology, everyone has access to the same suppliers. Although the technology is improving and there's increasing energy density, battery prices are coming down. It's more or less pricing that's equivalent from one IPP to the next. They all have access to the same suppliers. So it's really how you protect your ROI, and you are placing a bet on the future when you select your technology because it's advancing so quickly. And you really need to understand the market and what your future battery pricing is going to be, because loading your entire installation up front is going to be more capex intensive, and it's probably not going to be efficient to build out your entire battery system if assuming you signing up to a long-term supply. So Globelec works in the utility space with 15 to 20-year PPAs typically. So we look at a long investment horizon, and it's I'm focusing more on the CNI and utility space here. So augmentation of your battery system becomes a key ROI decision, and it's not without risk. So battery pricing is really positive at the moment. The lithium carbonate pricing has been on a downwards trajectory, almost 50% over the last 12 months or so. So it's an incredibly good time to be procuring batteries at the moment, but it is also an extremely volatile input cost into batteries. So you can see your battery pricing swinging pretty dramatically, and there's no good way to really future-proof it. So your ROI is going to be improved by doing a smaller installation up front as you need, and then augment your system every 2 to 4 years to add future battery storage as you need to top up your capacity for your customer. So that has some risk, but if you believe in a future downwards trajectory of battery pricing, it's going to be ROI positive. But there's a trade-off between trying to cement and have a higher degree of certainty of your ROI today and overbuilding and installing more up front, or basically riding the curve and seeing where battery pricing ends up in 2 to 4 years. So, you get different voices in the market as the technology is evolving. The market, I'd say, is a bit split at the moment. There's a big portion of the market that believes in sulfur sodium batteries that are going to replace the typical lithium-ion batteries we see today. And the input costs are a lot cheaper than the lithium carbonate that's driving a lot of the battery pricing today. So, there's a lot of future decisions you need to make in your initial investment that can be high risk for your overall investment. And battery returns, if it's a standalone battery system, are incredibly sensitive to the capex, and swings in your battery price can wipe out the economics of your deal if there's a 5 or 10% swing in your battery upfront cost between the day you're ordering your initial battery system and it comes to installation. So that, it's not without its risk, but augmentation and strategy around that is a very key decision in trying to either maximize or have more confidence around your ROI target and meeting that in future.
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what you've brought forward, especially the sentiments around, there's an element when you think around ROI in terms of these projects, where you need to have an element of certainty or really have thought around the ways in which you protect your ROI. And so there are elements of risk that you can't necessarily take, because, from a bankability perspective, it just simply wouldn't pass. But B, you just stand to lose a lot more if things go wrong. And so there has to be a sweet spot where, while you are protecting your ROI, there's an ability to optimize the system and projects that you're engaged in so that you can realize an even better ROI in some instances. And I think this is what then speaks to, you know, your management systems, the way you manage your contractors, and the ability really to have a really good view on the market and where the price is going. But particularly from our perspective and what we've seen now, especially in the CNI space, is there's a lot of thinking around how, from a regulatory framework perspective and where that is going, and how many more opportunities you can unlock, in your existing system, but also how many future opportunities you can almost add onto the system to bolster your ROI from that perspective. And I think, you know, a lot of what the Energy Council, a lot of the work that it's doing with regulators, with government bodies, and where we're seeing the market going, especially when we start being in a space where we can imagine a merchant market, you start seeing the value add, especially of private off-takers, where you can have an anchor kind of off-taker that is the base bankability case, but you've built a system that's been designed by the technicians and the engineers that can be optimized and dispatched to a merchant market where you can realize better value from those projects, or even the portfolio of projects. And I think this is where battery solutions and hybrid models come quite handy. And beyond it being on a standalone project basis, it being from an ecosystem perspective, because if you think about it, especially with the wheeling framework in place, etc., a lot of the private off-takers are kind of group corporates where you can design an energy security solution for them that looks at their whole system, but is an off-taker that's credible, and that one that a bank can take a view, a long-term utility scale view on their creditworthiness, and as an IPP or a developer, you've kind of got the expertise of managing and negotiating good contracts and have the relationships with good EPC contractors and OEMs. There is significant opportunity to build power plants or power systems, really, that are scaled higher than the required capacity of your anchor off-taker, but your investment case, as a worst case, where you protect your ROI, sits in that base anchor off-taker, and how that system looks, where you know that your fail-safe position means that you've got a bankable project that meets your minimum expectations from an ROI perspective. And I think that that's just kind of the thinking that we're seeing in the market that has opened up, because we can imagine a merchant market somewhere in the medium, actually sooner than we had expected 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And you're seeing a lot of private deals happening in the CNI space on the back, I guess, of South Africa's, you know, energy market. So I think for me, that brings a big opportunity of realization from an investor perspective, of both foreign investors and even in terms of localizing the market specifically. So yeah, I think that maybe can be where I stop and maybe contribute better with the bankability points.
Yeah, thank you very much for that input. You mentioned a very important point around the creditworthiness of off-takers, and I know in boardrooms this is a major topic, but I maybe want to invite Cheryl and Tejo on this, just to carry on from that thinking, from a return on investment perspective as lenders and as investors. What are your considerations? What are you looking at, and what can we learn from other markets that are already ahead in terms of deployment of these technologies, in terms of from an investment and a lending perspective? What are your considerations around there?
Thanks for the question. So I'm from Standard Bank, and I would say arguably we're the biggest lender for battery utility scale in South Africa and Africa. We did the first project in 2022 as a hybrid project. So how do battery projects differ to normal renewable projects from a bankability point of view? I think that's kind of the uniqueness of BESS. And so the first thing is on a technology basis. So at the moment, lithium is considered largely bankable. Some of the other technologies, I know sodium is one of those that people are exploring. There haven't been large-scale deployments globally, so at this stage, it would be considered a little bit more technology risk from a bank point of view, so we're very much in play in the lithium space. The next big question on bankability is what is the intended use of the BESS system? So are you combining it with your own solar and providing baseload power? Are you going to charge from the grid and do peak shaving? Or are you going to just be standalone project like what Eskom's looking to do with the first round of the battery program, which is smooth the flow of electrons in the Northern Cape and voltage control, etc. So there's different purposes, and that will determine how the battery is used. And depending on how the battery is used will depend on your degradation and other assumptions, which leads you to your biggest risk in battery, which is augmentation. So why is augmentation such an issue? There's three main things to consider with augmentation. One is the timing of augmentation. How much augmentation are you going to need to do? And that's linked to the usage of the battery. I don't think we're too concerned at this stage about degradation beyond normal use, but more around whether the battery will be used in how it was designed and the consequences of that on the overall system. The next big question on augmentation is on price. And there's two components to that price. One, if you're in a local currency environment, such as a ZAR market, what is that exchange rate going to be? Because you're going to purchase that equipment in US dollars. Now, when you do that on financial close, it's fine because you can enter into an FEC, that's a forward exchange contract, you know what price it's going to be, and you can convert. Now, you don't know the timing of your augmentation, and you do not know the dollar cost of your augmentation, so how can you hedge that? So therefore, you're exposed to exchange rate risk on your augmentation down the line. The other thing that you're exposed to is that price curve, and how much of the downward sloping expectation on prices are you going to bake into your base case model, and what happens if that doesn't materialize? A prime example is a few years ago, battery prices, contrary to all expectations, went up. That was because of supply chain issues, etc., but they did go up. And what happens if that's starting to happen in a period of time when you need to now do your augmentation? So those are some of the key risks around battery that really need to be considered. And then why is that so material is unlike a solar or wind farm, your major maintenance is zero to very little. Whereas on a battery project, because again, depending on the use of the system, you're expected to augment the entire system over the life of the PPA that you've entered into. And that is expected to be about a 1/3 cost of CapEx, of your original CapEx. So it's a very large investment that then needs to be spent in the model over the life of the PPA, but you don't have clear certainty of what that cost will be. So those are some of the key bankability considerations. As John said, the way to mitigate that is to overbuild up front, but that is very inefficient and it's going to be very expensive. So we're not promoting that necessarily as the solution, but you also need to consider all the downsides and find the right optimal level so that your return on investment is what you're expecting it to be and you don't suffer a major loss. Thanks.
Thanks, Gerald. I think I have to agree with you on a lot of those points, but I think maybe just to add in terms of, kind of how we will look at just your return on investment, there's obviously a financial component and there's also sort of like a social and an impact component. And I think obviously that's, the nature of the investors that we've got and the kind of funding that we look at. So maybe just to then touch on the social and the impact part of it when we look at these type of assets and really all investments that we'll do, that will, for the batteries particularly, I think, there's still quite a lot of education and training that still needs to be done for the local content and we're also just looking at what the legislation and the framework is changing. And I was, obviously the work that the Energy Council is doing is quite important in that, and where the industry is kind of moving. But maybe just to speak about some of the things that we've thought about, and some of the things that we're seeing in the market around the space. On the energy management and technology, I think some of the fellow panelists have spoken quite a bit on energy management in terms of, how are you going to use those batteries? When are you going to use them? When you're going to charge them, and when you're going to offload that power. So that's also quite an important mix that we're interested in and we want to look at, because obviously then it has a big impact on then, your whole return at the end. But I think another thing also has been the use of technology, and not only the technology of the batteries themselves, but the technology that you're using for the whole system. So, in terms of if you are a CNI and maybe you've got your own, you've got energy that you're taking from the grid, and then you've got the battery, and then you're kind of combining those two. The technology in the sense of trying to understand your demand and your load, and when what needs to be discharged. So I think that's also quite an important thing. I've spoken a bit about regulation and policy framework, but I think that's also an important kind of pillar that goes obviously then into your return. The other thing that I think is important from a financing perspective is the use of blended finance, or kind of thinking around the type of financing that you want to use throughout the life of the asset. So, Cheryl spoke quite a bit about the capex and kind of how much of that, how much of that you have at the beginning, and the different risks that you kind of have. So it's important to, one, make sure that the risk is sitting with the right party within the broader party of all groups. But I think secondly also to make sure that the financing that you're using at each point is kind of necessary. So we'll work with like a lot of different partners, obviously from, we will provide mostly equity, we'll work with the likes of bank who'll do debt, but also there's been quite a lot of collaborations that are happening with obviously your DFIs, and making sure that the right financing is getting in at the right time. So it might be that maybe at the very beginning of a project where maybe the risk is quite high and it's not yet clear and understood, you might find that a development bank is the right kind of financing partner to work with. And then once that's understood, then the different kind of financing kind of get in place. But I think even there, from a financing perspective, there's obviously financial incentives, which one can look at, one can talk about, but then I think also there's a lot of other innovative solutions that have been looked at, and local banks are also doing quite a lot of that. And I think lastly, the risks need to be understood. There's quite a lot of sensitivity in energy prices, and then also the technical skills that are needed, as well as obviously the market risks that could exist.
Thank you very much, Sekho, for that. I think the takeaway again for me, it sounds like as the technology evolves, as the hybrid solutions evolve, so must the financing of this deployment. It needs to be to keep innovating, to ensure that it meets the sort of risks that are posed, that are at the moment sort of unknown. So that's quite a good important point to make. I wonder as to whether or not from the audience, maybe we might have a minute or two to take a question by show of hands, if there is a question from the audience, maybe. No questions, so we are all energy experts here. That's good.